On Mother's Day, my son came to visit and brought his mother-in-law. While my wife was serving, he mocked, "This useless old woman never learned how to cook properly. I wish I had been born from my mother-in-law." I stood up from the table, adjusted my suit, and dragged him into my room. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I'm Stanley, and I'm 65 years old. After 4 decades of marriage to Dorothy, I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that Mother's Day, when my own son showed me exactly who he really was. It started like any other family gathering. Dorothy had been cooking since dawn, her graying hair tied back in that familiar bun she wore when she was focused. The smell of her famous pot roast filled our modest kitchen, mixing with the aroma of fresh dinner rolls and the apple pie cooling on the windowsill. She'd set the table with our good china, the set we'd received as a wedding gift 38 years ago. Every plate was positioned perfectly, every glass spotless. Marcus arrived at 2 in the afternoon with his wife Jennifer and their 8-year-old son, Tommy. But he wasn't alone. Behind them walked Jennifer's mother, Evelyn, carrying herself with that superior air she always had when she visited our home. I watched Dorothy's face fall slightly when she saw the unexpected guest, but she quickly recovered with that warm smile she'd perfected over the years. "Mrs. Patterson, what a lovely surprise," Dorothy said, wiping her hands on her apron before extending them in greeting. Evelyn barely acknowledged her, instead turning to Marcus. "You were right, honey. Your mother really did go all out." The way she said it made my stomach clench. There was something dismissive in her tone, as if Dorothy's efforts were quaint but unnecessary. I caught Dorothy's eye and saw the hurt flash across her face before she buried it behind her hostess smile. We gathered around the dining table, the one Dorothy had polished until it gleamed. She'd even brought out the cloth napkins, the ones she usually saved for Christmas and Easter. Marcus sat across from me, Jennifer to his right, and Evelyn beside her. Tommy squeezed between his parents, chattering excitedly about his baseball game from the day before. Dorothy emerged from the kitchen carrying the pot roast on her grandmother's serving platter, the one with the tiny chip on the edge that she'd never thrown away because it held too many memories. Her face was flushed from the heat of the oven, and small wisps of hair had escaped her bun, but she looked proud of what she'd prepared. "This looks wonderful, Mom," Jennifer said, and I felt a moment of relief. At least someone appreciated Dorothy's efforts. But Marcus barely glanced at the food. Instead, he was focused on his phone, typing something with that intense concentration he usually reserved for work emails. Dorothy stood there holding the platter, waiting for acknowledgement that never came. "Marcus," I said quietly, "your mother made your favorite." He looked up briefly, gave a non-committal grunt, and went back to his phone. "Yeah, looks good." Dorothy's smile wavered as she set the platter down and returned to the kitchen for the vegetables. I watched her shoulders, saw the slight slump that meant she was trying not to cry. After 40 years of marriage, I could read every emotion in the set of her posture. The meal progressed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Tommy's innocent chatter and Jennifer's attempts at polite conversation. Evelyn made several comments about how different things were prepared at her house, each observation delivered with the subtle superiority of someone who believed their way was better. "I always add rosemary to my pot roast," she mentioned while taking a bite. "It really elevates the flavor." Dorothy nodded politely. "That sounds lovely. I'll have to try that next time." "Oh, you should. Marcus raves about my cooking. Don't you, sweetheart?" Marcus looked up from his phone and nodded. "Evelyn's an amazing cook." The words hit Dorothy like a physical blow. I saw her fork pause halfway to her mouth, saw the way her breathing changed, but she said nothing, just continued eating in silence. It was when Dorothy brought out the apple pie that everything fell apart. She'd made it from scratch, using the recipe her own mother had taught her 50 years ago. The crust was golden brown, perfectly flaky, and she'd even arranged the apple slices in that decorative pattern she'd learned from watching cooking shows. "This looks beautiful, Dorothy," Evelyn said, but there was something patronizing in her voice. "Store-bought crusts are so convenient these days, aren't they?" Actually, I made it from scratch, Dorothy replied quietly. Oh, gee, Evelyn seemed genuinely surprised. How traditional. That's when Marcus finally put down his phone and really looked at the pie. His expression shifted, and I saw something ugly cross his features, something I'd been pretending not to notice for years. You know what, Mom? Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the table. This reminds me why I wish I'd been born into Evelyn's family instead. The words hung in the air like poison. Dorothy's face went white, and her hands began to tremble. Jennifer gasped softly, and even Tommy stopped talking, sensing the sudden tension. But Marcus wasn't finished. I mean, look at this. Evelyn makes restaurant-quality meals without even trying. Everything here tastes like you learned to cook in the 1950s and never evolved. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She just sat there, absorbing the cruelty of her own son's words like she'd been absorbing them for years. Seriously, Marcus continued, warming to his theme. Evelyn actually knows about seasoning, about presentation. This stuff? He gestured dismissively at the table full of food Dorothy had spent hours preparing. This stuff tastes like nursing home food. Marcus, Jennifer whispered, her voice shocked. That's enough. But he kept going. I'm just being honest. Evelyn raised her kids to appreciate quality. She taught them about good food, good wine, good taste. Meanwhile, I grew up thinking this. He picked up a piece of the pot roast with his fork and held it up like evidence. This was what real cooking looked like. Dorothy made a small sound, like air being forced from her lungs. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she still didn't speak. She just stared at her plate, her whole body rigid with the effort of not breaking down completely. That's when something inside me snapped. After 65 years on this earth, 40 of them watching Dorothy pour her heart into caring for this family, I had reached my limit. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Every eye at the table turned to me, but I was looking only at Marcus, my son, the boy Dorothy had raised with endless patience and love, the man who had just proven himself to be everything I'd feared he was becoming. Marcus, I said, my voice deadly calm, come with me. Dad, I'm eating now. There was something in my tone that brooked no argument. Marcus looked around the table, perhaps expecting support, but found only shocked faces staring back at him. Even Evelyn looked uncomfortable. He followed me down the hallway to my bedroom, his footsteps heavy behind mine. I could feel Dorothy's eyes on my back, could sense her confusion and hope warring with 30 years of disappointment. I closed the bedroom door behind us and turned to face my son. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, I could see the defensiveness already building in his expression. He was preparing to justify his behavior, to make excuses, to somehow make this Dorothy's fault. But I wasn't going to let him speak first. Not this time. I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time, Marcus, I said quietly. And now it's time you learned exactly who you really are. Cheer. Marcus stood in the middle of our bedroom, his face flushed with indignation. He was 35 years old, successful by most measures. But in that moment, he looked like the angry child he'd always been underneath the expensive suits and corporate confidence. What's this about, Dad? I was just being honest about... Sit down, I interrupted, gesturing to the chair beside my dresser. He remained standing, crossing his arms in that defiant pose I remembered from his teenage years. I don't need a lecture about hurting Mom's feelings. She's tougher than you think. I walked to my closet and pulled out a wooden box from the top shelf, one Marcus had probably seen 1,000 times, but never questioned. My hands were steadier than I'd expected as I carried it to the bed and set it down between us. Marcus, I said, looking directly into his eyes, you're not our biological son. The words landed like a physical blow. I watched his face change, confusion replacing anger, then disbelief flooding his features. His mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. What did you just say? You heard me. I opened the box, revealing manila folders, photographs, and documents I'd kept hidden for 32 years. You were adopted when you were 3 years old. Marcus stumbled backward until he hit the chair, then sank into it without seeming to realize he was sitting. That's impossible. I would remember. You were 3. and you were traumatized when you came to us. I pulled out the first folder, thick with official documents and social worker reports. Your biological parents were Richard and Susan Walsh. They gave you up not because they couldn't afford to keep you, but because they couldn't control you. I opened the folder and began reading from a report dated 33 years ago. The social worker's handwriting was careful, clinical, but the words painted a picture that still made my stomach turn. Subject displays extreme aggressive behavior toward mother figure. Has bitten, kicked, and thrown objects at maternal caregiver. Shows no remorse for destructive actions. When corrected, becomes violent and has caused physical harm to younger sibling. I looked up at Marcus, whose face had gone pale. You were 3 years old, and you were already hurting people who loved you. This is insane, Marcus whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Why are you telling me this now? Because 32 years ago, Dorothy and I thought we could love the anger out of you. We thought if we gave you enough stability, enough patience, enough second chances, you'd become the son we dreamed of having. I set the report aside and picked up a photograph. This is you on the day you came to us. The picture showed a small boy with dark hair and Marcus's unmistakable eyes, but there was something chilling about his expression even at that age. While most 3-year-olds in photographs looked innocent or playful, this child looked calculating. We tried everything, I continued, my voice getting quieter as the memories flooded back. Dorothy read every parenting book she could find. We took you to counselors, tried different schools, enrolled you in sports and music lessons. Do you want to know what you did to repay her efforts? Marcus didn't answer, but I could see his hands shaking in his lap. I pulled out another folder, this one containing school reports and incident documentation I'd secretly kept over the years. When you were 5, you told your teacher that Dorothy hit you. Child Services investigated us for 2 months. Dorothy cried herself to sleep every night, terrified they'd take you away just when she thought we were making progress. I don't remember. When you were 7, you killed Mrs. Henderson's cat and told her Dorothy did it. We had to pay for the cremation and endure months of accusations from our neighbor before I figured out what really happened. I watched Marcus's face as each revelation hit him. Part of me felt cruel doing this, but after watching him destroy Dorothy's spirit piece by piece for 3 decades, cruelty felt justified. When you were 9, you started a fire in the garage and blamed Tommy Morrison from next door. His family nearly moved away before I found the matches hidden in your bedroom. I set down another report. When you were 12, you told the school counselor that we were neglecting you because Dorothy worked double shifts to pay for your piano lessons. Stop, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. But I couldn't stop, not after 32 years of silence. Every time Dorothy tried to discipline you, you found a way to make her pay for it. Every time she showed you affection, you threw it back in her face, and every single time she blamed herself. I reached for the thickest folder in the box. Do you want to know the worst part? Your biological parents warned us. They told the social workers that you had something broken inside you, something that couldn't be fixed with love and patience. But Dorothy, my voice cracked slightly. Dorothy said every child deserved a chance. Marcus was staring at his hands now, and I could see tears dripping onto his expensive slacks. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because Dorothy made me promise. She said, if you ever found out you were adopted, you'd use it as an excuse to be even crueler to her. She said you'd blame every bad choice on the fact that we weren't your real parents. I pulled out a letter, yellowed with age, written in Dorothy's careful handwriting. She wrote this when you graduated high school. She was so proud, so hopeful, that college would help you mature. Do you want to know what she said? Without waiting for an answer, I began reading. Stanley, I know Marcus can be difficult, but I see glimpses of the good person he could become. Maybe we didn't fail completely. Maybe love really can overcome anything if we just keep trying. The letter shook in my hands as I continued. She wrote 15 pages about all the things she loved about you, all the moments when you showed kindness or gratitude. She kept hoping, right up until today, that the son she raised was still in there somewhere. Marcus was crying openly now, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his chest. Dad, I never meant... Yes, you did. My voice was quiet, but firm. You meant every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every time you made her feel small and worthless. And the worst part is, I let you do it because I kept believing Dorothy was right. I kept thinking love would eventually win. I reached into the box one more time and pulled out the newest addition to my collection, a business card from a private investigator I'd hired 6 months ago. Your biological parents are still alive, Marcus. Richard works construction in Nevada. Susan is a waitress in a diner outside Las Vegas. They have 3 other children they kept and raised successfully. I held up a recent photograph the investigator had taken. They're good people who made one impossible decision 35 years ago. Marcus looked at the photograph with trembling hands. His biological parents looked older, weathered by hard work and honest living, but there was something in their faces that I recognized immediately. Peace. They looked like people who had learned to live with a difficult choice, but had found happiness despite it. They gave you up because they couldn't protect their other children from you. They tried for 3 years to help you, and when nothing worked, they chose to save the family they could save. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood Dorothy and I had chosen specifically because it seemed safe for children. I called them last week. Marcus's head snapped up. You what? I told them about Tommy, about their grandson. They'd like to meet him. I turned back to face my son, and for the first time in years, I felt completely calm. Susan cried when I told her about Dorothy, about how hard she tried to love you. She said she always wondered if the woman who adopted you would understand what they'd gone through. Dad, please, you can't. I also told them about today, about what you said to your mother at her own Mother's Day dinner. My voice was deadly quiet now. Susan said it sounded exactly like something you would have done to her. The silence stretched between us, heavy with 32 years of secrets and lies and misplaced hope. Outside, I could hear Tommy's laughter from the backyard and Dorothy's voice calling him in for dessert. Normal sounds from a family that had never been normal. There's something else you need to know, I said, reaching for the last folder in the box, something about what you've been planning for Dorothy's future. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself, but I could see the fear creeping into his expression. He knew there was more coming, and some instinct was warning him that whatever I had to say next would be worse than learning about his adoption. I opened the final folder, the one I'd been adding to systematically for the past 2 years. Inside were photographs, recorded conversations, financial documents, and a detailed timeline that painted a picture of manipulation so calculated it had taken my breath away when I first discovered it. 2 years ago, Dorothy mentioned that you'd been asking a lot of questions about her memory, I began, pulling out a small digital recorder. She thought you were just concerned about her health, worried about early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's. Marcus straightened in his chair, and I saw his lawyer instincts kicking in. Dad, what are you getting at? I got curious, so I started paying attention. I set the recorder on the dresser between us. This is from Thanksgiving dinner last year. Jennifer and Tommy had gone for a walk, and you thought Dorothy and I were both napping. I pressed play, and Marcus's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably callous. Mom, you told me the same story 3 times today. Are you sure you're feeling okay? Dorothy's voice came through, slightly confused. Did I? I'm sorry, honey. I've been so tired lately. It's happening more and more. Dad's noticed too, but he's too proud to admit there's a problem. Maybe we should start thinking about getting you some help. What kind of help? Professional care. There are some really nice facilities that specialize in memory issues, places where you'd be safe and properly supervised. Liam. I stopped the recording and looked at Marcus, whose face had gone ashen. She wasn't having memory problems. She was exhausted from working double shifts at the hospital to help pay for Tommy's private school tuition. But you saw an opportunity, didn't you? Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand and pressed play again. The thing is, Mom, these places are expensive. We'd probably need to sell the house to afford proper care for you. But don't worry about that. Jennifer and I have been looking at some properties, and we found a perfect place for our family. Tommy could have his own playroom, and there'd be plenty of space for when the baby comes. Baby? Dorothy's voice was confused. Oh, we haven't announced it yet. Jennifer's only 6 weeks along, but we're going to need more space, and this house would be perfect for us. I clicked off the recorder and set it down. Jennifer wasn't pregnant, she still isn't. That was just part of your story, to make Dorothy feel guilty about holding onto her own home. Marcus was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. You recorded me? That's illegal. Actually, it's not. This is a one-party consent state, and Dorothy gave me permission to record conversations in our own home after she started questioning her own memory. I pulled out another device, a newer recorder with better sound quality. This is from 3 months ago. Dorothy was in the garden, and you were on the phone with Jennifer. The sound of Marcus's voice filled the room again, but this time he was speaking to his wife, and his tone was completely different. Cold, calculating, almost businesslike. The memory thing is working. She's starting to doubt herself about everything. Dad's getting worried too. I think we can probably move on this within the next 6 months. Jennifer's voice came through faintly. Are you sure this is the right way to handle it? It feels wrong, Marcus. Look, they're both getting older. This house is too big for them, and they can't maintain it properly. We're just helping them make a decision they should have made years ago. Besides, the property value has gone up by at least $200,000 since they bought it. They'll have plenty of money for a nice assisted living place. But your mom seems fine to me, sharp as ever. Trust me, I know how to handle her. She's always been too emotional, too dependent on everyone else's opinions. A few more months of gentle suggestions about her memory, and she'll be begging us to take over her finances. I stopped the recording and watched Marcus's reflection in the dresser mirror. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse around him. I have 18 hours of recordings, Marcus. Conversations where you coached Jennifer on what to say to make Dorothy doubt herself. Phone calls where you researched nursing homes and calculated how much money you'd make from selling this house. Discussions about forging Dorothy's signature on financial documents if she became too confused to sign them herself. I reached into the folder and pulled out a stack of printed emails. These are from your correspondence with Sunrise Manor, that expensive assisted living facility downtown. You put Dorothy's name on a waiting list without her knowledge and told them she had moderate dementia, requiring immediate placement. Marcus tried to stand up, but his legs seemed unsteady. Dad, you don't understand. I was just trying to plan ahead, to make sure Mom would be taken care of. You were trying to steal her home and convince her she was losing her mind so she wouldn't fight you on it. My voice was getting louder, despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you have any idea what you put her through? She's been terrified that she was developing Alzheimer's. She made me promise to tell her if I noticed any signs of mental decline because she was so afraid of becoming a burden on us. I pulled out another document, this one bearing an official letterhead. This is from the law office of Patterson and Associates. You consulted them about having Dorothy declared mentally incompetent so you could take over her financial affairs. The blood drained from Marcus's face completely. How did you... James Patterson and I served in Vietnam together. When you walked into his office 6 months ago and started talking about your poor, confused mother who needed to be protected from her own financial decisions, he called me immediately. I set the document down carefully. He wanted to know if Dorothy was really showing signs of dementia or if something else was going on. Marcus sank back into the chair, and for the first time since he was a child, he looked truly defeated. Dad, I wasn't going to actually go through with it. I was just exploring options. You mean, like you were just exploring options when you took out a second mortgage on Dorothy's house? I pulled out the final document in the folder, a loan application with Dorothy's forged signature. $50,000 secured against a property you don't own for a business investment that doesn't exist. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The same clock Dorothy had inherited from her mother and wound faithfully every Sunday morning for 23 years. Marcus was staring at the loan document like it was a venomous snake. How did you find out about that? The bank called Dorothy when the payment was 30 days late. She was confused because she didn't remember taking out any loan. She brought the paperwork to me, worried that her memory was worse than she thought. I leaned forward, making sure Marcus could see the fury in my eyes. She apologized to me for being so forgetful. She cried because she thought she was losing her mind. I was going to pay it back. With what money? Your consulting business is 3 months behind on rent, and Jennifer's part-time teaching job barely covers your grocery bills. I had done my homework thoroughly. You've been living on credit cards and the money you borrowed against Dorothy's house, all while convincing her that she was too mentally unstable to manage her own finances. Marcus looked around the room desperately, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Dad, I know how this looks, but I know exactly how it looks. It looks like a son who spent 32 years perfecting the art of psychological manipulation and who finally found a way to destroy the woman who raised him while making himself rich in the process. I stood up and walked to the window again, needing to put some distance between myself and the man I'd once hoped would become a better person than his genetics suggested. Outside, I could see Dorothy hanging laundry on the line, her movements careful and precise despite her worry about her supposedly failing memory. "There's one more thing," I said without turning around. "Dorothy doesn't know about any of this yet, but she's going to, because I'm done protecting you from the consequences of your choices." When I turned back to face Marcus, he was crying again, but these tears looked different, desperate rather than remorseful. "Dad, please, if you tell her it'll destroy her, she'll never forgive me." "She shouldn't forgive you." My voice was quiet but final, and neither should I. I walked to the bedroom door and put my hand on the doorknob. "In 15 minutes, I'm going to go back to that dining room and tell Dorothy and Jennifer exactly who you are and what you've been planning. You can either be there to face them like a man, or you can run away like the coward you've always been underneath." Marcus stood up shakily. "What about Tommy? What about my son?" For the first time since this conversation began, I felt something other than anger toward Marcus. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition that his actions would hurt an innocent child who didn't deserve to pay for his father's cruelty. "That depends entirely on what you choose to do next," I said. "But I can promise you this. Tommy will never grow up thinking it's acceptable to treat people the way you've treated Dorothy. Not if I have anything to say about it." I opened the door, letting the sounds of normal family life drift in from the rest of the house. 15 minutes, Marcus. Then the truth comes out, whether you're ready for it or not. I left Marcus sitting in that bedroom and walked back toward the dining room, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and determination. After 40 years of marriage, I was about to shatter the carefully constructed world Dorothy had built around our family. But as I approached the kitchen, I could hear her humming softly while she cleaned up the dishes Marcus had barely touched. Jennifer was helping her, stacking plates with the careful precision of someone trying to fill an uncomfortable silence. Evelyn sat at the table with Tommy, who was drawing pictures on the back of his placemat, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in the next room. "Is everything all right?" Dorothy asked when she saw me, her voice carrying that note of worry I'd been hearing more and more lately. Marcus seemed upset. I looked at my wife, at the woman who had sacrificed 32 years of her life trying to love a child who was incapable of loving her back, and I made a decision that would change everything. "Dorothy, I need you to sit down." Something in my tone made Jennifer look up sharply from the dishes. Evelyn stopped her conversation with Tommy and turned toward us. The kitchen, which had been filled with the comfortable sounds of family cleanup, fell silent. Dorothy dried her hands on her apron and moved slowly to the kitchen table, her eyes never leaving my face. "Stanley, you're scaring me." "Jennifer," I said quietly, "you should probably hear this too." Jennifer set down the plates she'd been holding and took the seat across from Dorothy. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing that this was a family matter she shouldn't be witnessing, but not knowing how to gracefully exit. "Tommy," I said to my grandson, "why don't you go play in the living room for a few minutes? The adults need to talk." Tommy looked disappointed, but obediently gathered his crayons and wandered toward the front of the house. Once he was out of earshot, I pulled out the chair beside Dorothy and sat down, reaching for her hands. "There are some things about Marcus that you don't know," I began carefully. "Things I should have told you years ago." Dorothy's face went pale. "Is he sick? Is that why he's been acting so strange lately?" "He's not sick, honey, but he hasn't been honest with us about some very important things." I squeezed her hands gently. "Jennifer, I think you should know that your husband has been planning to have Dorothy declared mentally incompetent so he can take control of her finances and force her into a nursing home." The words hit the kitchen like a physical blow. Jennifer gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. Dorothy just stared at me, her expression confused and disbelieving. "That's impossible," Jennifer whispered. "Marcus loves his parents. He's always talking about wanting to take care of you both when you get older." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small digital recorder. "I'm afraid not. Jennifer, your husband has been systematically convincing Dorothy that she's losing her memory so he can justify taking over her life. He's also forged her signature on a $50,000 loan against this house." Dorothy's hand started trembling in mine. "Stanley, what are you talking about? What loan?" Before I could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway. His face was red and blotchy from crying, and his expensive shirt was wrinkled from gripping it with nervous hands. He looked around the room, taking in our serious expressions and the recorder on the table. "Dad, please don't do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer turned toward her husband, her face a mixture of confusion and growing horror. "Marcus, what's going on? What is your father talking about?" Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, opening and closing his mouth like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he managed to speak. "It's not what it sounds like." That's when I pressed play on the recorder. Marcus's voice filled the kitchen, clear and unmistakably calculating, as he discussed Dorothy's supposed memory problems with Jennifer. The conversation about the house, about moving Dorothy to a nursing home, about the fictional pregnancy they'd used to justify needing more space. I watched Jennifer's face as she listened to her husband's voice, planning their future around Dorothy's manufactured mental decline. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. "Turn it off," Marcus said desperately. "Please, Dad, just turn it off." But I let it play through to the end, through Marcus's cold discussion of Dorothy's emotional weakness and his confidence that he could manipulate her into giving up her home. When it finished, the silence in the kitchen was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming. Dorothy was staring at Marcus with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not hurt, but something deeper and more devastating. The look of a woman finally seeing clearly after years of deliberate blindness. "You've been lying to me," she said quietly, "about my memory, about forgetting things." Marcus took a step into the kitchen, his hands outstretched in supplication. "Mom, I was just worried about you. Sometimes you do seem confused." I was confused because I was working 16-hour shifts to help pay for Tommy's school. Dorothy's voice was getting stronger, more certain. "I was exhausted, not losing my mind." Jennifer stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Marcus, is this true? Have you been lying to me too?" "Jennifer, listen to me. Answer the question." Jennifer's voice cracked like a whip. "Have you been lying to me about your mother's mental state?" Marcus looked around the room desperately, searching for someone who might offer him an escape, or at least some sympathy. But Dorothy was staring at him with dawning comprehension. Jennifer looked like she was seeing a stranger, and even Evelyn was backing away from the table with obvious discomfort. "I was trying to plan for the future," Marcus said weakly. "I was trying to make sure everyone would be taken care of." "By stealing my house?" Dorothy's voice was getting clearer, stronger, as if a fog was lifting from her mind. "By convincing me I was going crazy?" I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the loan documents. "Tell her about the $50,000, Marcus." Jennifer snatched the papers from my hand before Marcus could respond. Her eyes scanned the documents quickly, and I watched her face crumble as she realized what she was looking at. "You forged her signature," Jennifer whispered. "You took out a loan against your mother's house without her knowledge." "I was going to pay it back," Marcus said, but his voice sounded hollow, even to him. "With what money?" Dorothy stood up, and for the first time in years, she looked like the strong woman I'd married 4 decades ago. "You haven't had a steady income in 8 months. You've been living off credit cards and apparently off money you stole from me." Marcus's face crumpled, and he started crying again. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I just got in over my head with some investments, and I needed some quick cash to cover things until you could convince me I was mentally incompetent and take over all my finances." Dorothy's voice was ice cold now. "Until you could put me in a nursing home and sell my house to pay for your gambling debts." "They're not gambling debts," Marcus protested, then stopped abruptly as he realized what he'd just admitted. Jennifer was reading through the loan documents, her hands shaking. "Marcus, this loan is in default. The bank is going to foreclose on your mother's house because you haven't been making payments." "I can fix this," Marcus said desperately. "I just need a little more time." "Time for what?" Dorothy demanded. "Time to convince me I'm too crazy to stop you from destroying everything I've worked for?" Evelyn cleared her throat awkwardly. "Perhaps I should take Tommy home," she said quietly. "This seems like a private family matter." But Dorothy turned toward her with blazing eyes. "No, Mrs. Patterson, I think you should stay and hear exactly what kind of man your daughter married." I pulled out another document from my pocket, one I'd been saving for last. "Marcus, tell Jennifer about your consultation with the lawyer about having Dorothy declared mentally incompetent." Jennifer's head snapped up. "What lawyer?" Marcus looked like a cornered animal now, desperate and dangerous in his desperation. "Dad, please." "Patterson and Associates," I said, watching Evelyn's face carefully. "Marcus met with James Patterson 6 months ago to discuss the legal process for taking control of Dorothy's financial affairs." Evelyn's face went white. "James Patterson is my brother," she whispered. The kitchen fell silent again as everyone processed this information. Jennifer stared at her mother, then at her husband, then back at her mother. "You knew about this?" Jennifer asked Evelyn, her voice barely audible. Evelyn stammered. "James mentioned that someone had come to see him about an elderly relative, but he didn't tell me it was Marcus. He never would have. Client confidentiality." But Jennifer was already shaking her head, backing away from the table. "Oh my God, you all knew. You've all been planning this together." "No," Marcus and Evelyn said simultaneously, but the damage was done. Dorothy stood up slowly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had finally seen through 32 years of manipulation and lies. "Get out of my house," she said quietly. "All of you. Get out now." Marcus took a step toward her, but I stood up and blocked his path. After everything I'd discovered, after all the recordings and documents and evidence of his systematic cruelty, I wasn't going to let him manipulate Dorothy one more time. "You heard her," I said. "It's time for you to leave." But Marcus wasn't finished fighting yet, and his next words would reveal just how deep his capacity for cruelty really went. Marcus stood in our kitchen doorway like a man watching his entire world burn down around him. His face was flushed, his expensive shirt disheveled, and there was something wild in his eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of the 3-year-old boy who had first arrived at our home 32 years ago. "You want me to leave?" he said, his voice rising to a pitch that made Dorothy flinch. "Fine, but don't think this is over." Jennifer was still staring at the loan documents, her hands trembling as she read through the fine print. "Marcus, how much money do you owe? How deep in debt are we?" "That's not important right now," Marcus snapped, his attention still focused on Dorothy. "What's important is that you understand something, Mom. I am your son. I am your only child. And if you think you can just cut me out of your life, you're even more delusional than I thought." Dorothy's face went pale, but she didn't back down. "You forged my signature. You tried to steal my house. You spent 2 years convincing me I was losing my mind. What exactly do you think gives you the right to call yourself my son?" "Biology," Marcus said with a cruel smile. "Oh, wait, that's right. Dad told me the truth about that, didn't he? Turns out I'm not really your son at all. I'm just some broken kid you took in because you thought you could fix me." The words hit Dorothy like physical blows. I watched her face crumple as 32 years of love and sacrifice were dismissed as nothing more than a failed charity project. "Marcus, stop," Jennifer whispered, but her husband was beyond reason now. "You know what the funny thing is," Marcus continued, his voice getting louder and more vicious. "I never asked you to adopt me. I never asked for your fake love or your suffocating attention. You forced yourself on me because you couldn't have real children of your own." "We chose you," Dorothy said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "We could have had biological children, but we chose you because we thought you needed us." "Well, congratulations on that decision," Marcus laughed bitterly. 32 years of your life wasted on someone who never wanted you as a mother in the first place. That's when something inside me snapped completely. I'd spent 3 decades watching this man systematically destroy the best person I'd ever known, and I was done being civilized about it. I stepped forward and grabbed Marcus by the front of his shirt, pushing him back against the kitchen wall. At 65, I was still strong enough to make an impression, and Marcus's eyes widened with surprise and fear. "That's enough," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "You don't get to talk to her like that anymore. Dad, let go of me. You want to know what biology really means?" I tightened my grip on his shirt. "It means you inherited your biological father's inability to feel empathy. It means you got your biological mother's talent for manipulation. And it means that despite 32 years of Dorothy's love, you're exactly the same broken child they gave up on." Marcus tried to push me away, but I held firm. "Your biological parents didn't abandon you because they couldn't afford to keep you. They gave you up because you were already showing signs of being a sociopath. They were protecting their other children from you." "You're lying," Marcus gasped, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "I have their phone number," I said calmly. "Richard and Susan Walsh. They live in Nevada now, and they have 3 children they successfully raised to be decent human beings. Would you like me to call them? Would you like to hear them explain why they knew at age 3 that you were beyond help?" Jennifer had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, and now she stepped forward with the loan documents clutched in her hands. "Marcus, I need you to answer me honestly," she said, her voice shaking. "How much money do you owe? How much debt have you hidden from me?" Marcus looked at his wife, and for a moment I thought he might try to maintain his lies. But something in Jennifer's expression seemed to break through his defenses. "About $200,000, he admitted quietly. Jennifer staggered backward as if she'd been slapped. $200,000? How was that possible? Business investments, some bad trades, a few loans that didn't work out." Marcus was mumbling now, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Gambling," I said flatly. "He's been gambling online for 3 years. Poker, sports betting, day trading with money he couldn't afford to lose." Jennifer looked at me with desperate eyes. "How do you know that?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot I'd taken of Marcus's computer screen during one of his visits. He left his laptop open on the kitchen table 2 months ago. I got curious about what kept him so focused when he should have been visiting with Dorothy. The screenshot showed multiple browser tabs open to gambling websites, with account balances showing massive losses. Jennifer stared at the screen, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. "You've been gambling away our son's college fund," she whispered. "You've been gambling away our future." "I can win it back," Marcus said desperately. "I just need more time, more capital to work with. If Mom would just help us out temporarily." "Help you?" Dorothy's voice was incredulous. "You forged my signature and stole $50,000 from me. You tried to convince me I was mentally incompetent, and now you want me to give you more money to gamble away?" Evelyn, who had been sitting in uncomfortable silence through this entire confrontation, finally stood up. "Jennifer, I think we should leave. This is more than I can handle." But Jennifer wasn't looking at her mother anymore. She was staring at Marcus with the expression of someone seeing a stranger wearing her husband's face. "How long have you been lying to me?" she asked quietly. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but I interrupted him. "Tell her about the other women." The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Dorothy's sharp intake of breath. Jennifer's face went completely white. "What other women?" she whispered. I pulled out another folder from the wooden box I'd brought from the bedroom. Credit card statements showing charges at expensive restaurants and hotels on days when Marcus told you he was working late. Phone records showing hundreds of calls to numbers that don't belong to business contacts. Jennifer took the papers with shaking hands, scanning through months of evidence that her marriage had been a lie. "Marcus, who is Stephanie Rodriguez? Who is Amanda Chen? These phone numbers, these charges." "Jennifer, I can explain." 3 years, I continued relentlessly. At least 3 different women that I was able to identify, all while you were working double shifts as a teacher to support your family because Marcus claimed his business wasn't generating enough income. Jennifer was crying now, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Our marriage, our whole life together, it's all been a lie. No, Marcus said desperately, reaching for her. Jenny, please, I love you. I love Tommy. Everything I did was for our family. You stole from your mother to pay gambling debts, Jennifer screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. You cheated on me for 3 years. You tried to have your own mother declared mentally incompetent. How is any of that for our family? Evelyn was backing toward the kitchen door, clearly desperate to escape this scene. Jennifer, perhaps we should discuss this at home. No, Mother. Jennifer's voice was cold and final. I'm done discussing things at home. I'm done pretending everything is fine when it's not. I'm done enabling a man who thinks lying and stealing and cheating are acceptable ways to solve his problems. She turned toward Dorothy, her eyes red with tears, but her voice steady. Mrs. Patterson, I am so sorry. I had no idea Marcus was doing any of this. If I had known... I know you didn't, Dorothy said gently, her own anger seeming to soften in the face of Jennifer's obvious pain. You're a good person, Jennifer. You don't deserve this. Marcus looked around the room desperately, searching for someone who might still be willing to support him. But Dorothy was staring at him with disappointment. Jennifer was backing away from him with disgust, and even Evelyn looked like she couldn't get away from him fast enough. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice carrying a note of threat that made my blood run cold. You think you can just destroy my life and walk away? You think there won't be consequences? I stepped between Marcus and Dorothy, my protective instincts fully engaged. Are you threatening her? I'm stating facts, Marcus said, his voice getting steadier as his desperation transformed into something uglier. Dorothy is 63 years old, with no children, no grandchildren, and no family except me. You're 65 and not in the best health. What happens when you're both too old to take care of yourselves? Who's going to visit you in whatever nursing home you end up in? Marcus, stop, Jennifer pleaded, but he ignored her. You want to cut me out of your life? Fine. But don't come crawling back to me when you realize that I'm the only family you have. Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old and sick and alone. Dorothy straightened her shoulders, and when she spoke, her voice carried more strength than I'd heard from her in years. Marcus, she said quietly, I would rather die alone than spend another day pretending you're the son I raised you to be. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, and for a moment his mask of anger slipped to reveal something raw and wounded underneath. But instead of apologizing, instead of trying to repair the damage he'd done, he chose to inflict one final cruelty. Fine, he said, his voice cold and final. But Tommy stays with me. You'll never see your grandson again. The threat hung in the air like poison, and I watched Dorothy's face crumble as she realized what Marcus was really capable of taking from her. The silence that followed Marcus's threat seemed to stretch forever. Dorothy stood frozen in the middle of our kitchen, her face pale with the realization that her grandson might become another casualty of her son's cruelty. But before anyone could respond, Jennifer stepped forward with a determination I'd never seen from her before. No, she said quietly, but her voice carried absolute conviction. Tommy doesn't stay with you, Marcus. Tommy comes with me. Marcus turned toward his wife, confusion replacing the smugness on his face. What are you talking about? You can't just... I'm talking about divorce, Jennifer said, her voice getting stronger with each word. I'm talking about full custody of our son. I'm talking about making sure Tommy never grows up thinking it's acceptable to treat people the way you've treated your mother. You can't take my son away from me, Marcus snarled, but there was desperation creeping into his voice now. Jennifer pulled out her phone and began recording. Say that again, Marcus. Tell me again how you own our child. Tell me how you plan to keep a 8-year-old boy away from his grandmother as punishment for her refusing to let you steal her house. Marcus realized what she was doing and lunged for the phone, but I stepped between them. At 65, I might not have been as strong as I once was, but I was still strong enough to handle my son. Back off, I warned him, and something in my tone made him stop. Jennifer continued recording as she spoke directly to the camera. "This is Jennifer Walsh, and I'm documenting my husband Marcus Patterson's threat to keep our son away from his grandparents as retaliation for their refusal to enable his gambling addiction and financial fraud." "Jennifer, stop!" Evelyn pleaded from the doorway. "Think about what you're doing. Think about Tommy." "I am thinking about Tommy," Jennifer replied, still recording. "I'm thinking about the fact that he shouldn't grow up believing it's normal for a father to steal from his own mother. I'm thinking about the fact that he deserves better than a role model who lies, cheats, and manipulates the people who love him." She turned the camera toward Marcus, who was standing against the kitchen wall looking like a cornered animal. "Marcus, would you like to explain to our son's future therapist why you think it's appropriate to use a child as a weapon against elderly grandparents?" "Turn that damn thing off," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Jennifer replied calmly. "I'm done turning things off. I'm done pretending. I'm done protecting you from the consequences of your choices." She lowered the phone and looked directly at Dorothy. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to know that regardless of what happens between Marcus and me, you will always be Tommy's grandmother. I will never allow anyone to keep him away from you." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since this nightmare began, they looked like tears of relief rather than pain. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "Jennifer, you don't understand what you're doing. I can fight this. I have rights as Tommy's father." "What rights?" Jennifer's voice was ice cold now. "The right to gamble away his college fund. The right to teach him that stealing from family is acceptable. The right to show him that women exist to be manipulated and controlled." She pulled the loan documents out of her purse and held them up. "I'm taking these to my lawyer tomorrow, along with the recordings of you planning to defraud your mother. I'm also taking the evidence of your affairs and your gambling addiction. Let's see how your parental rights hold up when a judge hears all of this." Marcus looked around the room desperately, but he was completely alone now. Even Evelyn was staring at him with obvious disgust and disappointment. "You're all going to regret this," he said finally, but the threat sounded hollow, even to him. "The only thing I regret," Dorothy said quietly, "is that it took me 32 years to see who you really are." Marcus's face twisted with rage, and for a moment I thought he might try to attack someone. But instead, he just stood there, breathing heavily as the weight of his situation finally sank in. "Get out," Dorothy said again, her voice steady and sure. "Get out of my house and don't come back." Marcus looked at each of us one more time, his expression cycling through anger, desperation, and finally something that might have been grief. Then he turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. We heard the front door slam a few minutes later, followed by the sound of his car starting in the driveway. Jennifer sank into a kitchen chair as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "I can't believe I've been married to that man for 8 years, she said quietly. "How did I not see it?" "Because he's very good at hiding who he really is," I replied, sitting down beside her. "He's had a lifetime of practice manipulating people who care about him." Evelyn cleared her throat awkwardly. "Jennifer, I think I should probably leave. This is a family matter, and I don't think I should be here." Jennifer looked up at her mother with exhausted eyes. "Did you know about Uncle James, about Marcus consulting him?" "I swear to you I had no idea," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "James never would have told me about a client consultation, and if I had known what Marcus was planning—" "What would you have done?" Jennifer asked quietly. Evelyn was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I've spent so many years thinking Dorothy wasn't good enough for Marcus, believing he deserved better than this modest life. I never considered that maybe Dorothy and Stanley deserved better than him." She turned toward Dorothy with tears in her eyes. "I owe you an apology. I've been unkind to you for years, and you never deserved it. You raised Marcus with more patience and love than most biological mothers could have managed, and I criticized you for not being sophisticated enough for my standards." Dorothy nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Evelyn. But right now, I think we all need some time to process what just happened." After Evelyn left, the three of us sat in the kitchen in contemplative silence. Tommy had fallen asleep on the living room couch, blissfully unaware that his world had just been turned upside down. "What am I going to tell him?" Jennifer asked finally. "How do I explain to an 8-year-old that his father is, that he's—" "You tell him the truth," Dorothy said gently. "Age appropriately but honestly. You tell him that sometimes adults make very bad choices and that those choices have consequences." "Will you help me?" Jennifer asked. "With Tommy, I mean. I know this isn't your responsibility, but he loves you both so much, and I don't want him to lose his grandparents just because his father turned out to be—" "Of course we'll help," I said immediately. "Tommy is our grandson, and that doesn't change just because Marcus is no longer welcome in this house." 3 months later, I was sitting in the same kitchen, but everything had changed. Jennifer had filed for divorce and been awarded temporary custody of Tommy. Marcus had disappeared after the divorce papers were served, leaving behind only a note saying he was starting over somewhere else. The $50,000 loan had been resolved after Jennifer provided evidence of Marcus's forgery to the bank. Dorothy's credit rating had been restored, and the threat of foreclosure had been lifted. Jennifer had moved into the apartment above our garage, the one we'd always kept as a rental property. She said she wanted to be close enough to help us as we got older, but far enough away to maintain her independence. Tommy spent most afternoons with Dorothy after school, learning to cook the same recipes she'd tried unsuccessfully to teach Marcus 30 years earlier. The custody hearing had been brief and decisive. When Marcus failed to appear in court, Jennifer was awarded full legal and physical custody. The judge had been particularly unimpressed with the recordings of Marcus threatening to keep Tommy away from his grandparents as punishment. But perhaps the most significant change was in Dorothy herself. Without the constant stress of trying to please someone who could never be pleased, she seemed to have found her strength again. She'd returned to school part-time, taking art classes she'd always wanted to try. She'd joined a book club and made new friends who appreciated her for who she was, rather than judging her for what she wasn't. This morning, she was teaching Tommy how to make her famous apple pie when the doorbell rang. I answered it to find a FedEx driver with a certified letter addressed to Dorothy. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Marcus's handwriting. "Mom and Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I'm getting help. I'm in therapy, and I'm attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I know I can't undo the damage I've done, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I threw away. Take care of Tommy. He deserves the love I was too broken to accept. Marcus." Dorothy read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her apron pocket. "How do you feel?" I asked her. She was quiet for a long moment, watching Tommy roll out pie crust with intense concentration. "I feel sad for him," she said finally, "but I also feel free." She turned to look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that had been missing for years: peace. "For 32 years, I blamed myself for not being able to reach him," she continued. "I thought if I just loved him enough, tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, I could heal whatever was broken inside him. But you can't love someone into being a better person if they don't want to change." Tommy looked up from his pie crust, flour dusting his cheek. "Grandma, is this thick enough?" Dorothy smiled and ruffled his hair. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Just like you." As I watched my wife teaching our grandson the same patience and love she'd tried to give Marcus, I realized that Dorothy had been right all along about one thing. Love really could overcome anything. But sometimes the greatest act of love was knowing when to let go.